want to preach, I'm going to be like, who's going the week before me? And if she says Adam Allen, I'm going to be like, nope. Just kidding. I'd say that no matter who was preaching before me because you guys are all amazing. Okay. So I said yes because I read this passage in Luke and I thought it was so uplifting. No, just kidding. I was really struck by it. And it's really been because of this church that I've been able to read the Bible, not as an abstract text about God's love for humanity or a collection of violent patriarchal depictions of God that only makes sense with lots of historical and cultural context shifting, but as a set of texts that is relevant for this time period, for our country, for our city. There's also a way in which the Bible and really my faith has become much more relevant in the last few years that feels profoundly sad to me. And what I mean is that I used to be able to read stuff like pray for your enemies and think, well, that sounds kind of extreme. I don't have any enemies. And I used to read the apocalyptic texts and think, how interesting. I wonder how this related to people's experiences a long time ago. There are other books that I read growing up that confirmed this very privileged worldview where things like capital E evil were contained in other people's timelines and locations, like in Lord of the Rings, where Thranduil, the Elven King of the Woodland Realm in northern Mirkwood, and Allie's done with the kids, so I can tell you guys he's the father of my favorite elf, Legolas. Thranduil says, quote, such is the nature of evil. Out there in the vast ignorance of the world, it festers and spreads, a shadow that grows in the dark, a sleepless malice, as black as the oncoming wall of night. So it ever was, so will it always be. In time, all foul things come forth. You know, Tolkien's obsession with evil made sense to me because he was writing in 1930s England. And despite that not being that long ago, it always felt very long ago to me. I've oversimplified because sermons are short. It's not that I wasn't aware that people do bad things or that war and poverty and pollution and sexism and racism and homophobia and transphobia, all these things existed, but I thought we all agreed on the facts a little bit more. And I thought we'd learned some stuff from history. And I thought that if you zoomed out far enough, we were making progress. And I think 15 plus years ago, I probably would have defined apathy as the primary evil, which was also a way that I defined my own role, starting in the Peace Corps, which was to help US Americans care more about people in other places. But unfortunately, in the last decade, my understanding of enemy and evil has transformed from something I could read about to something I have to respond to. Like if an enemy is anyone that supports people in power whose policies hurt people or the planet, then I have so many enemies. And they don't respond well to my very informative comments online. The evil that used to seem unique and perverse now feels ordinary and pervasive. And since I have to respond to it, I often think how handy it would be if our enemies really looked like orcs or stormtroopers or had names like Bruella, DeVille. That old way of portraying evil as a caricature or a monster, I assume belied an assumption that readers and audiences had a lot in common. Evil was obvious. But now evil is a debate. There's a whole movement behind the other side with all sorts of folks in it, including Kimberly's uncle, what's his name, who's going to be at Thanksgiving. All of our far right connections, right? I think a lot of us have them, and I still don't know what to do with all those people. So I found it particularly notable that Jesus chooses to describe this future destruction in response to people admiring the beauty of the temple building. It reminds me of one of my guilty pleasures, which is watching Architectural Digest videos on YouTube where celebrities give tours of their immaculate residences. Inevitably, they call the kitchen their favorite room, even though you can tell that they don't cook. Um, They let us know where everyone hangs out at all their parties, and I promise this happens in every single one. They point out at least one object and say they're obsessed with it because of how much they love it. So it's easy to imagine that some dudes with beards and robes are discussing the beauty of the temple and maybe using words like provenance and motif. And then Jesus goes, just so you know, this is all going to come down. It occurred to me that I might not enjoy having Jesus at a dinner party. Um, so their response to him struck me as very reasonable, that they're full of anxiety and maybe also opportunistic planning. They want to know when this will happen. And as if anticipating that Jesus is not going to give them a date, they want to know the signs. What should we look for? When is the awful stuff going to happen? I've been very similar with our current Democratic backsliding. I've been trying to figure out the signs. Several months ago, Allie and I had a conversation about our greatest fears with this, and we've been having conversations about this recently in our congregation too. Like, who needs protection now? How can we advocate? What can we provide? What are we willing to risk for others? But also for many of us, this is the first time in our lifetime, not all of us, but for many of us, I think it's the first time that we've had to ask this question about our own selves. Are there things that could happen that would make us fear for our lives, or at least seriously interrupt the ability to enjoy our lives, which is a valid thing to think about. I think a lot about Zimbabwe because this is where Ali's parents lived and worked their whole lives up until the mid 2000s. It wasn't that the government threatened their lives, but the government caused hyperinflation, which affected their ability to stay there. If you don't know much about Zimbabwe, it's estimated that the peak month of inflation was about 79.6 billion% month on month, or 89.7 sextrillion% year on year around 2007, 2008. At that time, a $100 trillion bill could not pay for a bus fare. Ali and I went back to Zimbabwe as tourists with his parents in 2010, and at Victoria Falls, they will sell you $1 trillion Zimbabwe notes as a souvenir for $1. I thought it was amusing, but of course I didn't have to live through that economic collapse and lose my life savings. So yeah, I think it's natural for us to be looking at our current state of affairs in the US and wonder, how bad is it going to get? How much time do we have before that time? And what would tell us that we're near that time? These are the questions of Jesus' audience at the temple. It struck me as so similar. So I wanted to give some time for the real anxiety this has produced. I hear about it from my clients every week. I feel it actively in myself. And it's important. I'm a therapist in this profession. I need to know about healthy coping practices, and I also need to do them. So I do all the things. I exercise, I eat the blueberries, I walk on grass barefoot, I pray, I do deep breathing, I listen to Tara Brach. Like, I think a lot of you all do these things a lot too. But I would also say that I haven't been doing well since November 2024. Fuller Seminary likes to talk about thriving. I'm not thriving. And even though I can keep doing all the positive things, one thing I have lost is I haven't been able to read literature. The reason is that I'm addicted to the news. So you thought Architectural Digest videos was my cringe stress coping, but no. My problematic stress coping is that I get in bed with my computer and watch segments on YouTube of the news until my insomnia settles in. And then I watch more news. And then just to torture myself, I try to find the story that I just watched on CNN or ABC. I try to find that on Fox News just to see how they spin it. And then you guys are like, and then because I want to torture myself more, I will read the comments under the videos. Please, yeah, please don't do this. It's not good for your mental health. And I haven't yet been able to stop doing it, but I think when you confess things, it helps you get them out. So that's what I'm doing. So as I was reflecting on this, I realized that it was really self-centered of me to talk about my cringy stress coping behavior and not ask after any of you all. So here comes my giant sermon tangent. I sent an email on the listserv a few weeks ago asking people to share their cringe stress coping. And first off, I have to say that I understand that many people would not care to proclaim a cringy stress coping behavior in public, but I also thought from some of the responses that some of you might not employ any negative stress coping behaviors. So in the you failed the cringy part of the assignment category, I have Jennifer U. Brannon, but she, as you all know, is not ashamed that she does Zumba. Katerina, who plants vegetables and flowers. Um, and Emily Schnicker, who goes for walks in Descanso Gardens and does meditative watercolor art. I was hanging out with Emily on Friday, and she did clarify with me that she has her vices and thinks that you all know those already. And also, I should have used the word escapist coping to get more of the answers I was going for. So, sorry. A few of you got into my slightly cringy, but mostly just adorable category. Here I have Tyler, who carries his cat like a baby and sings to her. Susanna, who dances in her closet and sings karaoke in her car. Why are you dancing in the closet? I don't understand the closet. Okay. Like that contained space. Holly, who eats peanut butter from the jar. Karen, who reads murder mysteries that are violent and therefore not Anabaptist. Annika, who binge watches Bridget Everett. Carol, who eats Captain Crunch late at night. And Glory, who likes to watch clips of men trying on those contraptions that simulate menstrual cramps. So there's only a select few who really approached the cringe. And before I tell you who they are, let me just acknowledge that cringe is a value statement. It's it's an aesthetic, if you will. So my brothers and sisters in cringe are Maya, she's not here today, who listens to contemporary evangelical Christian music. Adam Allen, who makes comments on Instagram posts that don't make sense just to get a reaction. Uh, David Bear, who dances to David Bowie's Magic Dance from the Labyrinth, which is I had to look that up. That is some crazy stuff. Um, Jason is also downstairs. He told me he drinks Diet Cokes like they're going out of business. And this might only be cringy for super tasters, but I can't imagine. And I think we should do an intervention for him. Elizabeth Giles, who sings to really bad country music with a very bad country accent. Bert, who watches disaster reels on Facebook and has to rewatch in horror if it looks like the person might have actually been hurt or killed. Grace, who wrote in from the diaspora to say that she analyzes Taylor Swift as a phenomenon of capitalist white feminism, which is so nerdy. I put that in my cringe category. And finally, Corey, who has created a playlist of songs from musicals that fit the I want category, such as Belle, who's singing in the forest outside her little lawn, the town where she's like, I want adventure in the great wide summer. He has a playlist just of those songs that he can sing. So I wanted to bring all this up and laugh about it, but also acknowledge that it's sitting on top of harder moments we might all be having, some real worry and fear and pessimism. So I want to go back to how Jesus responds to the people who are asking him for the warnings and the signs, because I find it compelling that he tells them to make up their minds not to prepare a defense in advance. I don't think this is Jesus saying that we don't need to prepare for anything. This is not a don't worry about it text, because he's also telling them how hard it's going to be, and it sounds really bad. And he references their endurance. I think he's just reminding them that their purpose and their faith will be clarifying. When we hear from people in our community who know with a solemn lucidity what is worth sacrificing when a coworker is detained, When we join in the efforts of Grupo Autodefensa, which arose from the clarion call to protect neighbors from being kidnapped, and I know a lot of you all are doing similar work in a local context. When we're invited to speak at a city council meeting about affordable housing, when we're invited to join vigils for peace in Palestine, these are all efforts in which our faith is giving us the words and the wisdom. When I see our current political context in this biblical context, my desire to predict the disaster and get out just in time is tempered by a desire to join in the peace and justice work that is no longer far away or theoretical, but right here and right now. The other thing I can say about the anxiety and fear of the here and now is that it's requiring of me a much deeper reservoir. So my cringy stress coping behavior is not going to sustain me for the long haul. Neither is venting and analyzing and hand wringing, which I do plenty of. Rosie Bills mentioned Krista Tippett's podcast to me a few months ago, and I'm really glad she did. She's doing like a newer, she's always done the On Being. She's got one now, it's like a hope portal series. And she uses the phrase muscular hope, which is apropos to the kind of hope we need right now. We're in a historical moment that requires our hope to have some muscle, requires our community to have sinew and strength. So in one episode, Krista is speaking specifically about ecological damage done by the US administration's blatant disregard for climate change. And her guest is Joanna Macy, a philosopher of ecology and an environmental activist for decades. You might hear when I quote her, she's also a Buddhist teacher and scholar. She died this past summer. She was 96. So Krista says, quote, "We're feeling current ecological fragility at a cellular level, even if not conscious. We cannot be brimming with optimism around issues that are this dire and consequential. There's permission to not be brimming with optimism. But you must be present. And when you're present, there will be grieving to do, but strangely, kind of miraculously, the presence increases our capacity to love this world and it unleashes creativity," end quote. So then Joanna says that she thinks our difficulty at looking what we've done to our world doesn't stem from indifference, but from fear of pain. And she says this realization came to her right after Chernobyl. She described that time as, quote, "perhaps the most pivotal point in the landscape of my life, a dance with despair." That to see how we are called to not run from the discomfort and not run from the grief or the feelings of outrage or even fear, and that if we can be fearless to be with our pain, it turns. It doesn't stay static. It only doesn't change if we refuse to look at it. But when we look at it, when we take it in our hands, when we can just be with it and keep breathing, then it turns. It turns to reveal its other face, and the other face of our pain for the world is our love for the world, end quote. So does that make sense to you all? I think our collective spiritual groundedness won't change the nature of the dark cloud that looms before us, but it can change our understanding of how we need to respond to it. Krista's been podcasting to try to keep hope alive, and I think many of us are in some stage of figuring out how to work in the face of despair. Joanna Macy went on to spontaneously recite her favorite Rilke poem from memory. She says of the poem I'm about to read that it had entered her bloodstream. And I just want to connect us to this thread of consciousness that went from Rilke to Joanna and now hopefully to us. So Rilke reads like a meditation. You can close your eyes if you want to read. If you want to read, you can close your eyes if you want to while I read. And just a warning, I'm going to give a long pause after the first sentence, and then the poem's the end. So I'm going to just walk away then you can open your eyes when you hear my footsteps. Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What's it like, this intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, Be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the meaning discovered there. And if the world shall cease to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water, speak, I am.